Good morning, and thank you all for your contributions. I found it quite refreshing that there's a lot of positivity from you all about the growth in your sector and the potential for further growth. And I know you've talked about some of the barriers. You've talked about infrastructure, availability of labour, the energy, and obviously the institution's not up and running, and by extension the cross-border body's not operating. But I'm just wondering, are there other barriers? Like Stephen, you said in your statement about new or returning barriers within the All-Ireland economy, just to identify what those are, or maybe elaborate on what you mean, or examples of divergence between Britain and the EU and the impact it's had. And then just as well to ask about what damage will be done to the All-Ireland tourism industry by the electronic travel authorisation for tours as well, to maybe talk about that, and if that will have any sort of impact on the movement of labour as well, because we know there's a lot of people who live one side of the border and work the other. Okay, a lot of them are Irish or British citizens, it's not going to affect them, but many are not. I mean, I think 1/5 of our workforce here are born outside the island, and while some may have obtained citizenship, not all of them will. So will that have an impact on their circumstances as well?
Thank you, Chair. We're a miserable lot in the north. We're never happier than when we're miserable. We like to moan about things and groan about stuff, and that's a really happy place for us. So it's interesting that you've picked up that we're probably a bit more positive today. What we've had to deal with since 2016 has been challenging for us all. So we're maybe now just kind of facing forward a little bit, even for our own sanity. Never mind anything else. So it's interesting you've picked up on that. In terms of your question around new or returning barriers, Northern Ireland is not in the EU. The protocol, and by extension the Windsor Framework, doesn't mean that Northern Ireland's in the EU. It's just a series of rules that Northern Ireland businesses have to adhere to in order to avoid a border on the island of Ireland. So even in the manufacturing community, our manufacturers can't lead on public procurement projects in Ireland, for instance. Services isn't covered at all. We don't have freedom of movement. For a Northern Irish entrepreneur to establish a business in the south, he can't do that, or she can't do that, unless there's a resident of the state on the board. All those things have returned now that weren't in place when Northern Ireland, as part of the UK, was in the EU alongside Ireland. The two economies have never been so far apart since before we were joint members of the EU. So the challenge, or the call that Northern Ireland's still part of the EU is just simply not true. We left the EU as part of the UK, and barriers now exist that didn't exist before, or didn't exist prior to both countries acceding into the EU. We've seen the Irish government introduce good economic plans or programmes. I'll give a couple of examples. There was a liming scheme for improving soil quality in farms. The initial rules for that basically completely excluded mills in the north that produced the lime. It was blatant. You can only buy your lime from these producers in the south. So that was a barrier, obviously, and an unnecessary barrier to the all-Ireland economy. That first piece was removed, but then the criteria in terms of the type of lime that could be used meant that no mill in the north could do it anyway. So there are barriers passively, and some, I would say, deliberately being put in place in terms of that all-Ireland economy, in the interest, to be fair, of producers in Ireland, and that's, in one respect, that's exactly the right thing to do. The new DRS systems, our new DRS schemes launching now on the 1st of February, I think that it is. Or certainly as somebody who resides on the border, you can see across Donegal those new deposit return scheme where you bring your plastic bottles, your PET bottles, and get those in. Many drinks producers in Northern Ireland can't participate in that scheme, despite the fact that some of them would sell millions of units in Ireland, because they can't get the QR code and they can't get the logo. When they ask, well, where can we get those? No one will tell them where they can get them. So there's barriers being placed here all the time. There's probably good reasons from taxation point of view, from waste transfer point of view, that me and Derry doesn't gather up 100,000 bottles and just takes them off in Donegal and starts to claim the tax back on it. I can understand that. But there should be thought given to how businesses north and south should be participating in both of those things. The European rules on CBAM are launched now since the 1st of October. It's really going to come in from the beginning of February. The revenue commissioners in the south contacted engineering firms in Ireland and said, you need to begin the reporting on this. So businesses in the south obviously said, well, but this is a problem now for us. So they went immediately to their supply chain and said, this is your problem, not my problem. So they contacted their suppliers for engineering products in the north and said, you need to give us all this information for CBAM. Nobody has any idea about it because we're not part of it. We haven't been introduced to it. When we talked to the UK government said that's an EU thing. It's none of our business. Talk to the Irish government, they say, we're waiting for guidance from the EU. We talk to the EU, we go, oh, we're trying to work out what's going on here. So there's always going to be these wrinkles, these little bumps in the road in terms of the relationship with the UK and, as extension, Northern Ireland out of the EU. And we need structures in place in order to ensure that two things. One is, before either the EU or the UK moves on divergence, they think about what the mitigation should be and ensure the mitigation's in place before the policy is introduced. Or two, that there's structures and process and places and people in place to actually manage what the fallout from those divergence issues may be. I have to say that the Department for Foreign Affairs have been incredibly useful as a business community in Northern Ireland during the whole Brexit process. We've had incredibly good relationships with officials and ministers, successive ministers in those departments. And that's been really critical to get to where we are today. But we're only at the starting line about what Brexit looks like, both for the island of Ireland, both for Ireland, and for Northern Ireland. We are going to have this in perpetuity now, because UK is not joining the EU again. So there's always going to be issues, there's always going to be problems, and they're going to be identifiable first on the island of Ireland. The UK's new import border comes into play on the 1st of February 2024. Only at that point will the rest of the UK actually understand what Brexit looks like, because there's been an open door until that point in time. That's going to be a big challenge for Irish traders selling goods into the island of Britain. But equally, it's a challenge for us because we're meant to have unfettered access. And Dublin Port is a critical port for us in terms of getting goods to market in GB. So the next number of months is going to have a series of problems and issues. The Windsor Framework is continuing to roll out until October 2024. And we need as many people continuing to talk, continue to take an interest, and potentially taking a Northern Irish voice, whilst we're not there in person, to the European Parliament as well.